Well, here it is, the terrifying tale of the Abhartach, or the Irish vampire. The Abhartach, the terrifying tale of the Irish vampire. When I was a kid, there were two tales from Irish folklore that terrified me. One was of the Banshee. We'll do that on a different day. And the story of the Abhartach. Now, if you've never heard of the Abhartach, it is the Irish vampire, one of the fiercest of the many Irish mythological creatures. Ireland, like so many countries, is home of various tales and legends of terrifying creatures and spirits, and none scare me more when I was growing up than the Abhartach. Let's find out about him. The origin of the Abhartach. Over the years, I've heard different stories of the Abhartach. Each story tends to be very similar and follow a similar tale. It all began with an Irish historian by the name of Patrick Winston Joyce. Joyce was born in Balgon in the mighty Barrow Mountains, which straddle the borders of Limerick and Cork. One of his many books penned by Joyce was published in 1869 and was titled The Origin and History of Irish Names of Places. It was inside the pages of this book that the world was first introduced to the Abhartach. This is Legend 1. The Evil Dwarf of Derry. In the book, Joyce tells of the parish of Derry called Sathworthy, that should really be called Lightworthy, as in this parish there stands a monument of the Abhartach. In the book, Joyce states that the Abhartach is another word for dwarf. There's a place in the parish of Derry called Sleithvery, but it ought to have been called Leworthy in the light of the spectral monument of the Abhartach, the dwarf. He explains the dwarf was a cruel creature that possessed powerful type of magic, and those who were terrorized by the Abhartach soon had their prayers answered. The battle begins. Local chieftain, some believe that this was the legendary Finn McCulmach, killed the Abhartach and buried him upwards nearby. The locals thought their luck had changed, however, but the very next day the dwarf was back, and he was twice as evil as he had been. The chieftain returned and killed the Abhartach for a second time and proceeded to bury him in the same as before. Surely this was the end. Alas, the dwarf escaped his grave and spread his terror across the whole of Ireland. The chieftain was baffled. He had slain the Abhartach twice now and managed to return to Ireland again and again. Deciding he couldn't risk the dwarf returning a third time, he consulted a local druid. The druid advised that he slay the Abhartach again, but this time when it came to burying it, he must bury the creature upside down. The Jew believed that this should quench the dwarf magic. This worked, and the Abhartach never returned. Legend 2. The legend of how we get the modern-day vampire. There's another version of the legend that's much closely linked to the modern-day vampire, and his version of the tale, the Abhartach is killed and buried. However, when it escapes its grave, it does so to find fresh blood to drink. In this version, the chieftain goes by the name of Ketchin and consults a Christian saint instead of a druid. So again, a little different, but pretty much the same thing. The story goes that the saint told Crescent that the only way to kill the vampire was to find a sword made of yew wood. And if anybody knows the yew tree, it is also known as the tree of death. I do have a yew wand. Love yew tree, love it. It's brilliant wood, love it. The saint advised the chieftain that once the Abhartach was killed, he would need to bury him upside down, and that he would need to find a great stone to lock it in for good. The chieftain said, Chief Cretchen is said to have killed the Abhartach with ease, and after burying it nearby, he then had to lift a great stone and place it over the newly dug grave. Hence we get headstones, or when the Irish, we build up our graves by putting stones on the grave. Legend 3. Demanding a bowl of blood. The final legend is one that's told to many by a man named Bob Curran. Curran was a lecturer in Celtic history and folklore at the University in Ulster. According to Curran, the real castle Dracula can be found between the towns of Abhartach and Dungiven. A small hill now stands. He said that it was there that a fortress of a 5th or 6th century chieftain with the magical powers called the Abhartach once resided. Curran's story goes that the Abhartach was a great tyrant and that the people living near him wanted him gone. And they were scared of his magical powers, so they coaxed another chieftain to kill them. Abhartach was a great and tyrant to his people. They persuaded another king from a nearby guy, a guy called Catan, to come and kill him, which he did. And he buried him standing up, as baffled an Irish chieftain, as befitted an Irish chieftain. Within a day, however, Abhartach was back and demanded a bowl of blood from which his people in order to stain his vile corpse. Catan slew and buried him again, but the next day he was back, demanding the same bowl of blood. After brainstorming season with the local druids, Caitlin killed Abhartach with a sword of yew wood and buried him upside down and covered his grave with a large stone to prevent him from rising. And that's said to do the trick. And legend floor, the legend of Dearg Due. Now, Dearg Due means literally red blood. And here's the story. The legend of Dearg Due begins in a time when arranged marriages were commonplace in Ireland. It was a corner of Ireland that we know as Waterford, and the tragic tale unfolded. It was a village in Waterford that had a beautiful woman, and she had fallen in love with a local peasant and worked nearby farm. They began courting and talking of marriage and kids. Life for the couple appeared to be going to plan until the woman's father learned what was going on. And he was a wicked man and cared little for his daughter or her love or wants. The woman's cruel father had decided long ago that he would try and profit from his daughter's beauty. She was the desire of many men, and he knew he could use this to his advantage. The father knew of one man in particular that would appreciate his daughter's beauty, and that would be willing to pay generously for her hand in marriage. The man was a local chieftain, known and for wealth in his family's brutish ways. One night the father traveled to meet the chieftain, unbeknownst to his daughter, and he made the proposal. The chieftain knew the woman and readily agreed, promising to give the father land and riches in exchange for his daughter's hand. When the woman discovered what her father had promised, she was furious. But her hands were tied. She knew that she couldn't defy her father. On the day of the wedding arrived, and all but two were happy, the newly married bride and the local peasant. That was her true love. He decided on that day that he would do whatever it took to get revenge. The woman's husband turned out to be far more violent than his reputation. He used his new bride as a trophy, and he locked her away for days and weeks at a time. Soon her hope evaporated. She stopped eating and drinking, and soon after she passed away, despite her husband's great riches. Her burial was a modest affair, and to add insult to injury, her husband married soon after. Her father, still on cloud nine from his new fortune, was too immersed in his own greed to be bothered by his daughter's death. The only person that grieved her passing was her first love. His hunger for revenge intensified every time he visited her grave. Here's where the story takes a more into tragedy. So, the spirit of the woman was so filled with rage that it forced her out of the grave, lusting for vengeance. Her first stop was to her father's home. She arrived in his room where he was asleep and killed him as he lay. She moved quickly to the home of the evil chieftain. When she burst into his room, she found him in a bed with a number of other women, void of any sadness or regret. It's here that the vampire links begin. The woman launched herself at the chieftain and killed him stone dead, and then proceeded to suck the blood from his body. After drinking the blood of her evil husband, the Dearg Due felt invigorated and alive. The feeling gave her hunger for blood that couldn't be quenched. The Dearg Due, or red bloodsucker, used her great beauty to lure unsuspecting young men into dark corners. And once there, she sank her teeth deep into the necks and drank greedily. With each conquest, she got hungrier and hungrier, feasting on the blood of many men under the darkness of night with the promise of love. And then she disappeared. Some say that the grave of the young woman can be found at a place called the Tree of Strongbow, or the Strongbow's Tree in Waterford. And those are the tales of the Abhartach, or the Irish vampire.